Tuesday, March 15th. I remember that date like it was burned into my soul, dear ones. I was sitting in my rocking chair on the porch, the same chair where I used to rock Carmen to sleep when she was just a baby. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine from my little garden, and I was saying my evening rosary when I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked up those wooden steps slower than usual, her face carrying that expression I'd learned to fear over the past months. You know that look, don't you? When someone you love has made a decision about your life, and you're the last one to know about it. "Mama, we need to talk," she said, not even sitting down next to me like she used to do when she was troubled. She stood there, arms crossed, looking everywhere except into my eyes. My heart started racing because a mother always knows when something terrible is coming. "Carmen, mija, what's wrong?" I asked, setting my rosary aside. "Come, sit with your old mother. Tell me what's bothering you." But she didn't sit. Instead, she took a deep breath and said the words that would haunt me for months. "Mama, you can't live here anymore. You're a burden to my family." A burden? Imagine that, dear friends. 68 years of life, 40 years of sacrifice, of working my fingers to the bone to give this child everything I never had, and I had become a burden. The rosary slipped from my trembling hands and fell to the wooden floor with a soft clatter. Each bead seemed to echo in the silence that followed her words. I felt something break inside my chest, something that I didn't think could ever be repaired. "I found a place," she continued, her voice getting stronger as if she'd rehearsed this speech. "It's a nice facility, Mama. Clean. They have activities. Other people your age. You'll be happier there." Happier? Away from the grandchildren I helped raise, away from the kitchen where I taught her to make her father's favorite sancocho, away from the garden where we planted roses together when she graduated from university. I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind her of every sleepless night I spent by her bedside when she had fever, every peso I saved to buy her school supplies, every prayer I whispered to the Virgin Mary asking for her protection, but the words wouldn't come. They were trapped behind the lump in my throat, behind the tears I refused to let fall in front of her. "When?" I finally managed to whisper. "This weekend. I've already paid the first month. This weekend. 4 days to pack up a lifetime. 4 days to disappear from the family I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears." That night, alone in my room, I opened the old metal box I kept hidden under my bed. Inside were documents, papers, certificates, secrets that I had carried for 40 years, secrets that could change everything, but I had kept them locked away out of love, out of the desire to let my daughter feel secure in her marriage, to let her believe that her husband was the provider, the protector. As I touched those yellowed papers, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. I wasn't just being thrown out of my daughter's house. I was being thrown out of my own home. Because you see, dear friends, there was something Carmen didn't know, something that would soon turn her world upside down. But that night, sitting on the edge of my bed with those documents in my shaking hands, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I would leave with dignity. I would carry my secret a little longer. I had no idea that God was already setting the stage for justice. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been told you're too much, too old, too inconvenient, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like a burden to the people you love most? This is a safe space where our stories matter, where our pain is heard, and where we find strength to keep going. Because what happened next changed everything. Do you know what the most painful thing is for a mother, dear ones? It's not childbirth. It's not the sleepless nights. It's not even watching your child get hurt. It's when your own child looks at you like you're a stranger, like everything you sacrificed meant nothing. I need to take you back to when Carmen was just 7 years old, and her father died in that terrible accident at the construction site in Medellin. One moment I was a wife with dreams and plans. The next I was a widow with a child to raise and bills I couldn't even pronounce. Those were the hardest years of my life. I worked 3 jobs just to keep food on our table. I cleaned offices at dawn, sold empanadas outside the metro station during lunch. and sewed clothes by candlelight until my eyes burned. My hands were always cracked from the cleaning chemicals, always stained with masa from the empanadas, always pricked from the sewing needles. But Carmen never went to bed hungry, not once. She always had clean uniforms for school, always had her notebooks and pencils, always had a kiss goodnight, even when I could barely keep my eyes open. Mija, I used to tell her, while braiding her hair before school, study hard. Education is the only inheritance I can give you. And she did study. My Carmen was so smart, so determined. When she graduated from university with her accounting degree, I cried tears of joy in that auditorium. All those years of sacrifice had been worth it. Then she met Roberto, handsome Roberto with his engineering job and his fancy car. I was happy for her, truly I was. Every mother wants to see her daughter loved and provided for. When they got married, I thought, finally, my Carmen will have the comfortable life I could never give her. But Roberto saw me differently. From the very beginning, he made little comments. Doña Conceição, Carmen doesn't need to work anymore. I can provide for my family. Doña Conceição, maybe you should consider getting your own place now that Carmen is settled. Always polite, always with a smile, but I could see what he was really saying. I tried to make myself useful, dear ones. I cooked Roberto's favorite meals. I helped with the children when they were born. I cleaned the house without being asked, but it was never enough. I was always too loud, too old-fashioned, too present. The worst part was watching Carmen change. My strong, independent daughter who used to come to me with every problem, every joy, every fear. She started keeping her distance. Roberto would whisper things in her ear, and she'd nod along. He'd make jokes about old people and their ways, and she'd giggle nervously. Mama, she started saying, maybe you should rest more. Watch your novelas. We don't need help with the children. But I could see little Miguel struggling with his homework, the same math problems I had helped Carmen with years before. I could see baby Sophia crying while Carmen juggled work calls and housework. I wanted to help, but every time I stepped forward, I felt like I was stepping into forbidden territory. The children started treating me differently too. Abuela talks too loud during cartoons, Miguel would complain. Abuela's food is too spicy, Sophia would say, pushing away the rice and beans I'd made with so much love. I started eating dinner alone, watching my family laugh and talk at the other end of the table like I wasn't even there. I became a ghost in the house, where I had hoped to spend my golden years surrounded by love. Roberto got a promotion, and they redecorated the house. Gone were the family photos that included me. Gone was the rocking chair where I used to read to the children. Gone was any trace that I had ever been part of this family's story. It's more modern this way, Mama, Carmen explained when I asked about our old family portrait. Roberto says we need to look forward, not backward. Forward, as if I was the past that needed to be erased. I started spending more time in my room, praying my rosary, asking God to help me understand what I had done wrong. Had I loved too much? Had I sacrificed too much? Had I made myself so small that I had simply disappeared? The night before Carmen told me I had to leave, I heard them talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the thin walls. She's getting worse, Carmen, Roberto was saying. Yesterday she rearranged the spice cabinet again, and the neighbors are starting to talk about the smell of her cooking. I know, Carmen replied, and my heart broke a little more. She raised me, Roberto. She sacrificed everything for me. And now it's time for you to put your own family first. Your children deserve better than living with someone who's stuck in the past. That's when I understood. I wasn't just unwanted. I was seen as a threat to their perfect life, their modern family, their future. But they had no idea what future they were really risking. There are nights that seem eternal, dear ones. Nights where your soul screams in silence and only God can hear you. That Tuesday night, after Carmen's words had shattered my world, I experienced the longest night of my 68 years. After she left me sitting on that porch with my broken heart and scattered rosary beads, I just sat there in the darkness. The jasmine that had smelled so sweet an hour before now seemed to mock me with its beauty. How could the world still be beautiful when mine had just ended? I picked up each rosary bead slowly, one by one, as if I was collecting pieces of my shattered faith. Dios te salve Maria, I whispered. But the words felt hollow. Where was Mary now? Where was the mother's heart that was supposed to understand my pain? Inside the house, I could hear normal life continuing. Roberto helping Miguel with homework, Carmen giving Sofia her bath, the television playing some comedy show with its bright, cheerful laughter. Life went on as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't just collapsed. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the 2 suitcases Carmen had left for me. 2 suitcases for 68 years of living. How do you pack a lifetime into so little space? Which memories do you keep, and which do you leave behind? I started with my clothes, folding each piece carefully the way my mother had taught me. The blue dress I wore to Carmen's wedding, still beautiful after all these years. The black one from her father's funeral, still carrying the smell of grief. The yellow blouse Carmen bought me for my 60th birthday, back when she still remembered birthdays. Then came the photographs. Oh, those photographs hurt the most. Carmen's first steps, first day of school, graduation, wedding day. In every picture, I was there, supporting, celebrating, loving. When did I become invisible? When did my presence change from blessing to burden? At the bottom of my dresser drawer was the metal box, my secret box. I had hidden it there for so many years that sometimes I almost forgot it existed. But that night, with trembling fingers, I opened it for the first time in months. The documents were still there, yellowed with age, but still legal, still valid. Property deeds, bank certificates, inheritance papers, papers that proved this house, the one Carmen was throwing me out of, legally belonged to me. Papers that showed Roberto wasn't the great provider he pretended to be. When Carmen's father died, he had been wiser than I knew. He left everything to me, not to Carmen, because he wanted to make sure I would always be protected. Promise me, he had said on his deathbed. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in your own home. But I had broken that promise, hadn't I? I had let Roberto make me feel like an intruder. I had let Carmen treat me like charity case. I had forgotten my own worth, my own rights. Why hadn't I told Carmen about the inheritance? Because I was afraid, dear ones. Afraid she would marry Roberto for the wrong reasons. Afraid she would see me as someone to manipulate instead of love. I wanted her to marry for love, to feel independent, to never feel like she owed me anything. But my good intentions had backfired terribly. As I held those papers in my shaking hands, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Carmen was coming to say good night, like she used to do when she was little. But she paused outside my door, and I heard her whisper to Roberto, "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" "She'll be better off with people her own age," he replied. "And so will we." They walked away, without knocking, without checking if I was okay, without saying good night. That's when the tears finally came. Not gentle tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the bottom of my soul. I cried for the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. I cried for the young woman who used to call me first with every piece of good news. I cried for the daughter who had promised to take care of me when I got old, just like I had taken care of her. But mostly, I cried for myself, for the woman who had forgotten her own value, for the mother who had loved so much that she had lost herself. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I would not tell Carmen about the papers. Not yet. I would leave with dignity, with my head held high. I would not beg. I would not plead. I would not use my secret as a weapon. But I would not forget who I was either. I packed those documents carefully between the pages of my Bible, right between the book of Job and the Psalms. Because if anyone understood suffering and waiting for justice, it was Job. And if anyone understood crying out to God in pain, it was David. As dawn broke through my bedroom window, I had made peace with my decision. I would go to that nursing home. I would wait. I would pray. and I would trust that God had a plan, even when I couldn't see it. But God works in mysterious ways, dear ones, and He was already preparing a lesson that would shake our family to its very foundation. Secrets are like seeds buried deep in the earth, dear ones. They can remain dormant for years, decades even, but when their time comes, they bloom in ways we never expected. The nursing home San Jose wasn't terrible, I have to admit. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow. There were flowers in the courtyard, and the staff treated us with kindness. But kindness from strangers isn't the same as love from family, is it? My room was small but clean. A single bed, a wooden dresser, a chair by the window that looked out onto the street. I unpacked my 2 suitcases slowly, trying to make this sterile space feel like home. The photographs went on the dresser, my rosary on the nightstand, my clothes in the narrow closet. But the metal box I kept under my bed, just like I had for 40 years. The other residents were kind enough. Doña Mercedes from Cartagena, who had been a teacher for 50 years. Don Alberto from Cali, whose children lived in Miami and sent money but never visited. Señora Rosa from Bucaramanga, whose mind wandered sometimes, but whose hands still remembered how to crochet beautiful things. We were all there for the same reason, really. We had become inconvenient to the families we had raised and loved and sacrificed for. During my first week there, I kept myself busy with their activities. Bingo on Mondays, rosary circle on Wednesdays, craft time on Fridays. I helped in the kitchen sometimes, teaching the young cooks how to make proper sancocho the way my husband loved it. But at night, alone in my room, I would take out that metal box and remember. Let me tell you about my husband, Eduardo. He was a simple man, a construction worker with calloused hands and a gentle heart. He wasn't educated like Roberto, didn't wear fancy suits or drive expensive cars, but he was wise in ways that mattered. When Carmen was 5, Eduardo started having chest pains. The doctors said his heart was weak, probably from years of hard labor and too many cigarettes. He knew he didn't have long, but instead of spending his last months feeling sorry for himself, he spent them planning. Conceição, he said to me one evening as we sat on our little porch in Medellin, I need to tell you something important. I've been saving money, investing in properties. You think I'm just a construction worker, but I've been learning, watching, buying small lots when I could. I was shocked. My Eduardo, who barely finished elementary school, had been building a real estate portfolio without me knowing. He pulled out a folder full of papers, deeds to lots in different neighborhoods, certificates of deposit, bank accounts I didn't even know existed. This is for you and Carmen, he said. But listen to me carefully, mi amor. Don't tell Carmen about all of this. Not yet. Let her grow up independent. Let her learn to work for what she wants. If she knows about this money too early, it might change her, make her lazy or greedy. But Eduardo, I protested, what if something happens to me? What if she needs help? Then you'll know what to do, he said, touching my face with his rough, loving hands. You're stronger than you think, Conceição. Stronger than you know. He died 3 months later on a rainy Thursday morning in October. I was so lost in grief that I barely understood what the lawyer was telling me about the inheritance. I signed papers, I nodded when I was supposed to nod, but my heart was broken and my mind was foggy. It wasn't until months later that I realized what Eduardo had really left us. Not just a small house, but multiple properties. Not just a little savings account, but investments that had grown over the years. My simple construction worker husband had made us wealthy, and I was the only one who knew. But I kept Eduardo's wish. I raised Carmen to be independent, to work hard, to value effort over easy money. When she struggled through university, working part-time jobs to pay for her books, I could have helped more. When she and Roberto bought their first apartment, I could have told them they didn't need a mortgage, but I didn't. Because I wanted her to be strong, to be proud of what she achieved with her own hands. I thought I was protecting her from becoming spoiled, from attracting the wrong kind of man. How ironic that she ended up with Roberto anyway, a man who saw me as dead weight, who convinced her that I was nothing but an old woman taking up space. Sitting in that nursing home room, holding those papers that proved I owned not just the house they lived in, but 3 other properties in good neighborhoods of Bogota, I felt the full weight of my 40-year secret. I could have stopped Carmen from throwing me out with just one phone call to the lawyer. I could have shown her the deeds and watched her face change from dismissal to shock to shame. I could have made Roberto squirm, made him realize that the burden he wanted gone was actually his landlady. But Eduardo's voice echoed in my memory. "You're stronger than you think, Conceição." Was I strong enough to endure this injustice for the sake of a bigger lesson? Was I strong enough to let my daughter learn about respect and gratitude the hard way? As I folded those papers back into my Bible, I whispered a prayer. Dios mío, show me when the time is right. Show me how to use this secret for good and not for revenge. I had no idea that God was already setting the wheels in motion. God works in mysterious ways, dear ones. When we think everything is lost, when we believe we're forgotten and abandoned, He shows us that He had a plan all along. And sometimes that plan is bigger than anything we could have imagined. It was my 3rd week at San Jose when I received the phone call that would change everything. I was in the courtyard, helping Doña Mercedes tend to the small vegetable garden we had started together. My hands were dirty with soil, and I was actually smiling for the first time in months, watching tiny tomato sprouts push through the earth. "Señora Mendoza," called Sister Patricia from the office. "You have a phone call. It's important." My heart stopped. Important calls at nursing homes usually meant bad news. Had something happened to Carmen, to the children? Despite everything, they were still my family, still the center of my world. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to the phone, my mind racing with terrible possibilities. "Aló," I said, my voice trembling. "Doña Conceição, this is Fernando Ruiz, your late husband's lawyer. I apologize for not contacting you sooner, but there's been a development regarding Eduardo's estate that requires your immediate attention. Don Fernando." I remembered him vaguely from those confusing days after Eduardo's funeral, a kind man with gray hair and patient eyes who had tried to explain legal documents to a grieving widow. "What kind of development?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "I prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow? It's quite important, and frankly, it's good news for a change." Good news? At my age, in my situation, I had almost forgotten what those words meant. The next morning, I took the bus downtown to Don Fernando's office. The city looked different from the bus window, more vibrant somehow, as if I was seeing it with new eyes. Or maybe it was hope that was coloring everything differently. Don Fernando's office was exactly as I remembered it from 40 years ago. Tall bookshelves filled with legal texts, a heavy wooden desk, certificates and diplomas covering the walls. He greeted me with a warm smile and gentle handshake. "Doña Conceição, please sit down. I have some remarkable news to share with you." He opened a thick folder and spread out documents across his desk. Some I recognized from my metal box, others were completely new to me. "Your husband was more astute than even you knew," he began. "The properties he left you, they've been appreciating significantly over the years. But more importantly, there are additional assets that I've recently discovered in our files." Additional assets? My head was spinning. Eduardo had invested in several commercial properties through a holding company. Small businesses, apartment buildings, even a little shopping center in the north of the city. The rental income has been accumulating in a trust account for decades. He showed me bank statements, property valuations, rental agreements, numbers that seemed impossible, amounts that made my hands shake. "Doña Conceição, you're not just a property owner. You're quite wealthy. Wealthy. Me, the woman who had cleaned offices and sold empanadas to survive. The woman who was currently living in a nursing home because her daughter thought she was a burden. But why didn't I know about this before?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eduardo left very specific instructions. The additional properties were to remain in trust until you either reached the age of 70 or faced a significant hardship that required their use. He wanted to make sure you would never be vulnerable, never be dependent on anyone. I started crying then. Not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. My Eduardo, even in death, was still protecting me, still making sure I would never be helpless. There's more, Don Fernando continued gently. The shopping center is being sold to a development company. Your share of the sale is... He wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. I stared at those digits, unable to process what I was seeing. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of possessing. What do I do with all of this? I asked. Whatever you want, Doña Conceição. You're free. You can live anywhere you choose. Do anything you want. You never have to depend on anyone again. As I sat in that office, surrounded by papers that proved my financial independence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the cruel power that Roberto wielded over Carmen. Not the manipulative power that turns families against each other, but the power of choice, the power of dignity, the power of self-determination. But with that power came responsibility. What was I going to do with this gift Eduardo had left me? How was I going to use this revelation? Don Fernando, I said, folding the papers carefully, I need some time to think about this, and I need to pray about what God wants me to do. Of course, he replied. But Doña Conceição, may I ask why you're living in a nursing home when you own multiple properties? I looked at this kind man, this keeper of my husband's secrets, and I told him the truth about Carmen, about Roberto, about being called a burden and thrown out of my own house. His face darkened with anger. That's your house they're living in, Doña Conceição. Your house. I know, I said quietly, but they don't know that yet. As I rode the bus back to San Jose that afternoon, I felt like a different woman. Not because of the money, though that was life-changing, but because I finally understood that God had never abandoned me. He had been preparing this moment, this opportunity, this chance for justice and redemption. The question now was, what was I going to do with it? Forgiveness is not a feeling, dear ones. It's a decision we make every day, every hour, every moment when the pain tries to turn us bitter. And let me tell you, those next 3 months at San Jose were the hardest spiritual battle of my life. After learning about Eduardo's legacy, I could have marched straight to Carmen's house and thrown those papers in Roberto's arrogant face. I could have called the police and had them evicted from my property. I could have made them grovel, made them beg, made them feel as small and worthless as they had made me feel. But every time that vengeful voice whispered in my ear, I heard Eduardo's words. You're stronger than you think, Conceição. Was I strong enough to choose love over revenge? Was I strong enough to let God handle the justice while I handled the forgiveness? I developed a routine at San Jose that kept me sane and kept my heart soft. Every morning at 6, I would wake up and walk to the little chapel they had on the grounds. It was just a simple room with wooden pews and a statue of the Sacred Heart, but it became my sanctuary. Jesus, I would pray, kneeling on that hard wooden kneeler. Show me how to love like you loved. Show me how to forgive like you forgave. Don't let this hurt turn me into someone I wouldn't recognize. The other residents started noticing changes in me. Not because I was happier, I was still grieving the loss of my family, but because I was different, more peaceful maybe, more centered. Conceição, Doña Mercedes said to me one morning, as we shared coffee in the dining room, you have a light in your eyes that wasn't there before. What happened? How could I explain that carrying a secret for 40 years had been heavy? But now that I knew the full extent of God's provision, that weight had transformed into something else. Not burden, but responsibility. Not shame, but purpose. I started helping more around San Jose, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I taught cooking classes, showing the younger staff how to make proper arepas and how to season beans so they actually had flavor. I organized prayer circles for residents who felt forgotten by their families. I wrote letters for those whose hands were too arthritic to hold a pen. You know, Sister Patricia told me one afternoon, you're different from most of our residents. You don't seem defeated by being here. Sister, I replied, folding towels in the laundry room, sometimes God puts us exactly where we need to be. even when it doesn't feel like a blessing at first. But the real test of my growing strength came every Sunday. That's when Carmen would call. Hola, Mama, she would say, her voice carefully cheerful. How are you settling in? Are you making friends? I'm fine, mija, I would answer, and I was. That was the surprising part. The people here are kind. I'm learning new things every day. Good, good. The children ask about you sometimes. Sometimes. Not often. Just sometimes. How are Miguel and Sofia? I would ask, hungry for any scrap of information about my grandchildren. Growing so fast? Miguel made the soccer team at school. Sofia lost her first tooth. Milestones. I was missing. Moments I should have been there for. But I swallowed the pain and said, tell them their abuela loves them. I will, Mama, I will. But I could hear something in Carmen's voice during those calls. Something that sounded like guilt? Uncertainty? The confident tone she had used when throwing me out was cracking little by little. Roberto never came to visit, of course. In 4 months at San Jose, my son-in-law never once asked how I was doing. But Carmen came twice. Awkward visits, where she sat on the edge of the visitor's chair like she couldn't wait to leave. During her second visit, she looked around my small room and said, Mama, you've made this place quite cozy. A person can make a home anywhere if they have to, I replied. Not unkindly, but not pretending either. Do you like it here? She asked, and for a moment she sounded like the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. I'm learning to find peace wherever God puts me, Carmen. She left that day looking troubled, and I wondered if her conscience was finally beginning to wake up. The truth is, dear ones, those months at San Jose taught me something precious. They taught me who I was when everything familiar was stripped away. They taught me that my worth wasn't dependent on being needed by my family. They taught me that I could survive being unwanted and still maintain my dignity. Most importantly, they prepared me for what was coming. Because while I was learning to forgive and finding my strength in that little nursing home, life was happening to Carmen and Roberto, the life they had built without me, the perfect modern family they had created by erasing me from their story. And that life was about to come crashing down in ways they never could have imagined. They say God is slow, but he never forgets, dear ones. And that Thursday morning in July, divine justice knocked on Carmen's door in the form of a registered letter from the bank. I was in the chapel at San Jose, saying my morning prayers, when Sister Patricia rushed in with her face flushed from running. Doña Conceição, she whispered urgently, you have an emergency phone call. It's your daughter and she sounds desperate. My heart clenched. Emergency calls always meant something terrible. I hurried to the office, my mind racing through possibilities. An accident. One of the children hurt. Roberto in the hospital. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. Mama? Carmen's voice was barely recognizable. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her words. Mama, I don't know what to do. I don't know who else to call. Carmen, mija, calm down. Tell me what happened. Are the children okay? The children are fine, but Mama, we're going to lose the house. Roberto lost his job 3 weeks ago, and we can't make the mortgage payments. They're foreclosing. We have 30 days to come up with the money or we'll be homeless. The irony hit me like a physical blow. The woman who had thrown me out for being a burden was now crying to me because she was about to lose the roof over her head, the roof that legally belonged to me. But hearing my daughter's desperation, seeing her broken and scared for the first time in years, didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel like a mother again. How much do you owe? I asked, though I already knew I could cover it without even touching the principal of Eduardo's inheritance. 58 million pesos, she sobbed. Roberto's been lying to me, Mama. He's been gambling, taking cash advances on credit cards, borrowing from loan sharks. I didn't know about any of it until they came to repossess his car last week. Roberto, the great provider. Roberto, who had convinced Carmen that I was dead weight. Roberto, who had insisted that modern families didn't need old people taking up space. Where are you going to go? I asked gently. I don't know. Roberto's talking about moving to his cousin's farm in Boyaca. But Mama, the children's school, their friends, everything they know is here. Miguel's in his last year of high school. Sofia just made the school choir. How can I tear them away from everything? And Roberto, what is he doing to fix this situation? Carmen was quiet for a long moment. He says it's not his fault. He says the economy is bad, that his boss had it out for him. He won't even look for another job because he says no one will hire him at his age. 52 years old and already giving up. I was 68 and just discovering I had more power than I'd ever dreamed of. Mama, Carmen continued, her voice getting smaller. I know I have no right to ask this. I know what I did to you was unforgivable. But do you know anyone who might lend us money? Do you have any ideas? I'm desperate. There it was, the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for during all those months of prayer and reflection. The moment when I could choose between justice and mercy, between revenge and redemption. Carmen, I said carefully, I need you to come see me. Today. Can you come this afternoon? Yes, of course. Should I bring Roberto? No, I said firmly. Just you. We need to talk. Just the two of us. Mother to daughter. After I hung up, I sat in that little office for a long time, staring at the phone. Sister Patricia brought me a cup of chamomile tea and sat beside me without saying anything. She had become like a daughter to me during my months at San Jose, and somehow she always knew when I needed silent companionship. Sister, I finally said, have you ever had to choose between giving someone what they deserve and giving them what they need? She smiled gently. Every day, Doña Conceição. That's what grace is, giving people what they need instead of what they deserve. But what if they hurt you deeply? What if they threw you away like garbage? Then you have to decide who you want to be, the person who got hurt or the person who chooses to heal. That afternoon, I took out my metal box for what I knew would be the last time it would be hidden. I removed all the documents, all the proof of Eduardo's love and foresight, all the evidence of the security he had built for us. As I organized those papers, I thought about Roberto's arrogance, his manipulation, his certainty that he was superior to an old, uneducated woman. I thought about Carmen's weakness, her willingness to abandon the mother who had sacrificed everything for her. I could destroy them both with these documents. I could watch them grovel, watch them realize that the burden they had discarded was actually their salvation. But as I touched the deed to the house Eduardo had bought for our family, I heard his voice again. You're stronger than you think, Conceição. Strong enough to be merciful, strong enough to be the bigger person, strong enough to show my daughter what real love looks like. When Carmen arrived that evening, her eyes were red from crying and her hands were shaking. She looked older, defeated, nothing like the confident woman who had banished me months before. Sit down, mija, I said gently, gesturing to the chair across from me in the visiting room. She sat, and for the first time in years, she really looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. Mama, she began, I'm so sorry to burden you with this. I know you can't help. I know you don't have money, but I didn't know who else to talk to. I reached across the small table and took her hands in mine. They were soft, manicured, the hands of a woman who had never had to scrub floors or sew by candlelight. Carmen, I said quietly, there are some things you need to know. There are moments that define who we really are, dear ones. Moments when we have all the power to hurt someone, but we choose to heal instead. That evening in the visiting room at San Jose, holding my daughter's trembling hands, I faced the biggest test of my character. Carmen sat across from me, broken and desperate, her perfect life crumbling around her. The confident woman who had called me a burden was gone. In her place was a frightened mother who didn't know how to protect her children. Mama, she whispered, I've made such a mess of everything. Roberto keeps saying we'll figure it out, but I can see it in his eyes. He's given up. He's talking about leaving, about going to work on his cousin's farm and sending for us later. But I know he won't. I know he's going to abandon us. I squeezed her hands gently. Tell me about the children. How are they handling this? They don't know yet. Miguel thinks Roberto is just working late every night. But really he's at those bars near the market, drinking with his unemployed friends. Sophia keeps asking why Daddy seems so angry all the time. Carmen's voice broke. I'm trying to hold it together, but I'm failing them, Mama. I'm failing my children the same way I failed you. That admission hung in the air between us. For the first time since throwing me out, Carmen was acknowledging what she had done. How did you fail me, Carmen? I asked quietly. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. I threw away the most important person in my life. I listened to Roberto when he said you were holding us back, that we needed to think about our future instead of our past. I convinced myself that you'd be happier with people your own age because it was easier than admitting I was being selfish. And now I realize that I threw away my history, my foundation, my guide. When this crisis hit, my first instinct was to call you. Not Roberto's family, not my friends, but you. Because deep down, I know you're the strongest person I've ever known. You're the one who never gave up, never stopped fighting for family. I reached into the folder beside my chair and slowly pulled out the first document, the original deed to the house. Eduardo's signature still clear after all these years. Carmen, I said, placing the paper on the table between us, I need to show you something. She looked down at the document, confusion clouding her features. What is this? It's the deed to your house, the house you've been living in for the past 8 years. She picked up the paper, scanning it with her accountant's eye for detail. I watched as her face changed, as understanding dawned, as the implications hit her like a physical blow. This says the house belongs to you, but that's impossible. Roberto bought this house. He has the mortgage papers, the bank statements. Roberto has a mortgage on my house, Carmen. A mortgage I never authorized, never signed for, never agreed to. I pulled out more documents, bank statements showing the rental income from other properties, investment certificates, property valuations, the paper trail of Eduardo's love and foresight. Carmen stared at the papers spread across the table, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find words. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I'll never forget. Shock, shame, and dawning comprehension. Mama, all this time, you've been wealthy, Carmen. Your father left us very well provided for. I've been receiving rental income from multiple properties for 40 years. The house you threw me out of, it's been paid off since before you were born. She collapsed forward, her head in her hands, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child with a skinned knee. Oh, Dios mío. Oh, Mama, what have I done? What have we done to you? You believed a lie, mija. Roberto told you I was a burden, and you wanted to believe it because it made your life easier. But you never asked me. You never wondered how a cleaning lady could afford to help pay for your university, or how I always seemed to have money for the children's birthdays, or how I never seemed to worry about bills. But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you stop me from throwing you out? I reached across and lifted her chin so she had to look at me. Because your father asked me not to tell you unless you really needed to know. He wanted you to be independent, to work hard, to value what you earned. And because I needed to know if you loved me for who I was, not for what I could give you. And I failed that test completely. No, mija. You're here now. You came to me when you were in trouble, even after what you did. That tells me something about who you really are underneath Roberto's influence. Carmen slid out of her chair and fell to her knees beside me, grabbing my hands and pressing them to her face. Mama, please forgive me, please. I was so stupid, so blind, so cruel. I threw away the most precious thing in my life because I was weak and selfish. Please tell me it's not too late. Please tell me you can forgive me. I looked down at my daughter, this child I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, kneeling on the floor of a nursing home, begging forgiveness for abandoning her mother. The moment I had imagined during countless sleepless nights was finally here. But instead of triumph, I felt only love. Instead of vindication, I felt only compassion. Stand up, Carmen, I said gently. You're my daughter. You don't kneel to me. We kneel together to God, and we ask Him to help us rebuild what was broken. She stood up, still crying, still holding my hands. Does this mean, can you ever trust me again? Can you ever love me again? Mija, I said, pulling her into my arms for the first time in months. I never stopped loving you. Not for one day, not for 1 minute. That's what mothers do. We love even when it hurts. We love even when we're not loved back. As I held my daughter in that visiting room, feeling her tears wet my shoulder, I knew that this was the moment Eduardo had been preparing us for. This was why he had left me those papers. This was why God had allowed me to endure the pain of abandonment. Not for revenge, but for redemption. Not to punish, but to heal. Not to divide, but to restore. The hardest part was over. Now came the work of rebuilding a family. Forgiveness is like mending a torn dress, dear ones. It hurts at first when you push the needle through the fabric, but without that painful process, the garment can never be whole again. The weeks following my revelation to Carmen was some of the most difficult, but also the most healing of both our lives. Carmen left San Jose that night carrying copies of all the documents, but more importantly, carrying the weight of understanding what she had done. The next morning, she called me before 8 o'clock. "Mama," she said, her voice still hoarse from crying. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times you tried to help and I pushed you away. All the times Roberto made those comments and I laughed along. How do I live with this guilt?" "One day at a time, mija. Guilt can destroy you if you let it, or it can change you if you use it right. Which do you choose?" The first thing Carmen had to do was confront Roberto. She told me later that when she spread those documents on their dining room table, my dining room table, his face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, denial, anger, and finally a calculating look that showed his true character. "So the old woman was playing games all along," he said, which told Carmen everything she needed to know about the man she had married. "She wasn't playing games, Roberto. She was protecting me from marrying someone who only cared about money. Don't be naive, Carmen. She was manipulating you, making herself seem helpless so you'd feel sorry for her." That's when Carmen finally saw Roberto clearly. Even faced with proof that he had been wrong about me, that I had been the family's true provider all along, he couldn't admit his mistakes. He couldn't show respect, couldn't show gratitude, couldn't show basic human decency. "I want you to leave," Carmen told him. "Tonight. You can't throw me out of my own house. It was never your house, Roberto. It was never our house. It's my mother's house. And I'm asking you to leave before I have to call the police." But removing Roberto from the house was easier than removing his influence from Carmen's heart. She had spent 8 years being told that I was backward, old-fashioned, irrelevant. She had 8 years of guilt to work through, 8 years of damage to undo. The first time she visited me after the revelation, she brought Miguel and Sofia. My grandchildren looked confused and a little scared. Their father had left, their mother had been crying for days, and suddenly they were visiting the grandmother they barely knew. "Abuela," Miguel said awkwardly, "Mama says we might come live with you. Is that true?" I looked at Carmen, who nodded nervously. "If you want us, Mama. If you can forgive us enough to let us be a family again." "Mijo," I said to Miguel, "would you like that? Living with your old abuela who talks too loud and cooks food that's too spicy." He looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry I said those things. Papa told us, he said—" "I know what he said, Miguel, but that's in the past. What matters now is what we build together." Sofia, who was only 9, was more direct. "Abuela, why did you go away? Did we do something bad?" My heart broke a little more. "No, mi amor, you did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults make mistakes, and children get hurt because of those mistakes. But we're going to fix it now. Moving back into my house, because that's what it was, my house, felt strange at first. Carmen had redecorated everything, erased most traces of the life Eduardo and I had built there. But slowly, we began to make it feel like home again. I moved back into the master bedroom, the room I had shared with Eduardo for 25 years. Carmen took the guest room and the children kept their rooms. But more than the physical arrangement, we had to rebuild the emotional architecture of our family. It wasn't easy. Carmen had to learn to see me as her mother again, not as a burden or an obligation. She had to remember how to ask for my advice, how to accept my help, how to treat me with the respect I deserved. The children had to unlearn 8 years of seeing me as the strange old woman who lived in their house instead of their beloved grandmother. They had to remember that I was the one who had taught them their first words, who had walked them to school when Carmen was working, who had sat up with them when they were sick. But children are resilient, and love has a way of healing even the deepest wounds. "Abuela," Sophia said to me one evening as I helped her with homework, "I remember now. You used to make me hot chocolate when I had bad dreams. I did, mi amor, and I can make it again whenever you want. Even if I have bad dreams about Papa leaving." I pulled her onto my lap, this granddaughter who had been taught to keep her distance from me, especially then. Miguel took longer to warm up to me, but teenage boys are complicated creatures anyway. The breakthrough came when he brought home a failing grade in mathematics and was afraid to tell Carmen. "She's going to be so disappointed," he said, standing in the kitchen where I was making dinner. "She's already dealing with so much stress." "Sit down, mijo," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "Show me this test." For the next 2 hours, I worked with him on algebra, the same way I had helped Carmen with her homework 30 years earlier. When we finally got the concepts to click, he looked at me with new respect. "Abuela, you're really smart." Papa always said, "Your papa said many things that weren't true, Miguel. But you're old enough now to decide for yourself what you believe." The hardest part was rebuilding trust with Carmen. She would catch herself speaking to me in the careful, distant tone she had developed over the years, then stop and try to find her way back to the warmth we used to share. "I don't know how to be your daughter anymore," she confessed to me one night as we sat on the porch, in the rocking chair where this whole story began. "The same way you were my daughter before Roberto convinced you to be ashamed of me," I said gently. "The same way you were when you used to tell me about your dreams, your fears, your hopes. But how do you forgive me, Mama? How do you look at me and not remember the pain I caused you?" I was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of our neighborhood at night, feeling the peace that had finally returned to my home. "Because holding on to anger would poison what we're trying to rebuild, mija. Because you're my daughter, and I love you more than I love my own pride. And because your father would be proud of the woman you're becoming through this struggle." That night, for the first time in years, Carmen fell asleep on my shoulder like she used to do when she was little and troubled by nightmares. We were finally becoming a family again. God gives us second chances, dear ones, but we are the ones who must have the courage to take them, to rebuild what was broken, and to create something even more beautiful from the pieces of our shattered lives. It's been 8 months now since that night when Carmen knelt beside me in the visiting room at San Jose, begging for forgiveness. 8 months since the truth came out and changed everything. As I sit here in my rocking chair, the same chair where this whole story began, I can barely recognize the family we've become. The house feels alive again. Instead of the sterile, modern silence that Roberto preferred, our home is filled with the sounds of real life. Sophia practicing piano in the afternoons, Miguel talking on the phone with his girlfriend, Carmen humming while she cooks dinner. The kitchen smells like garlic and cilantro again, like home should smell. Carmen and I have developed new rhythms, new traditions. Every morning she brings me a cup of coffee, and we sit together on the porch, planning our day. She tells me about her work. She's gotten a promotion at the accounting firm, probably because she's no longer stressed about hiding bills from Roberto or covering up his financial disasters. "Mama," she said to me just yesterday, "I never realized how exhausting it was to live with someone who was always angry, always blaming other people for his problems. This house feels peaceful now. The children have transformed completely. Sophia, who used to avoid me, now follows me around the house like a little shadow. She helps me in the garden, learning the names of all the plants and asking endless questions about everything. Abuela, she said last week while we were planting new roses, why did you never get angry at us for forgetting you? Because, mi amor, love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Love just keeps loving and waiting for love to come back. Miguel has become my technology teacher, showing me how to use the tablet Carmen bought me, helping me learn to video call with my old friends from San Jose. But more than that, he's become my confidant in a way that surprises both of us. Abuela, he told me recently, I'm glad Papa left. I was getting tired of pretending to agree with everything he said just to keep the peace. What do you mean, mijo? He used to say terrible things about you when you weren't around, and I knew they weren't true. I remembered how you used to take care of us, how you always made everything better when we were sad or scared. But he made it seem like remembering those things was wrong, like loving you was being disloyal to him. It breaks my heart to think of my grandchildren feeling torn between love and loyalty, having to choose between honoring their father and loving their grandmother. But it also fills me with hope to see how clearly they understand the difference between real love and manipulation now. Roberto has tried to come back twice. The first time he showed up drunk, demanding to see his children and threatening to call lawyers about his property rights. Carmen calmly showed him the restraining order she had obtained, and I called the police. He hasn't been back since. The second time, he sent letters to the children trying to convince them that Carmen and I had conspired against him, that we had stolen his family with money and lies. Miguel brought the letter to me, confused and upset. Is any of this true, Abuela? Did you and Mama plan this? I sat him down and told him the whole story again, from the beginning, about his grandfather's wisdom, about the 40 years of secrets, about choosing love over revenge, even when I had every right to be angry. The only thing your mother and I conspired to do, Miguel, was to rebuild our family with truth instead of lies, with respect instead of manipulation, with love instead of fear. He nodded and threw the letter away without showing it to Sophia. But the real miracle of these past months has been watching Carmen become the daughter I always knew she could be. Not the insecure woman who needed Roberto's approval for everything, but the strong, capable, loving person she was before she lost herself in a bad marriage. She started bringing her work problems to me again, asking for my advice about office politics and difficult clients. She includes me in decisions about the children's schooling, their activities, their futures. She values my opinion, seeks my guidance, treats me like the wise woman I've become through decades of living and learning. Mama, she said to me last month, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Always, mija. Are you happy, really happy, or are you just being kind to us because you feel sorry for us? I looked at this daughter who had hurt me so deeply, who had abandoned me when I needed her most, who had called me a burden and thrown me away like garbage, and I felt nothing but love. Carmen, these have been the happiest months I've had since your father died. Not because of the money, not because I got my house back, but because I got my family back, because I'm not invisible anymore, because I matter again. We've started new traditions too. Every Sunday after church, we visit the cemetery where Eduardo is buried. I tell him about the children's accomplishments, about Carmen's strength, about how his wisdom and love are still protecting our family, even after all these years. You were right, mi amor, I whispered to his headstone, while Carmen and the children arranged fresh flowers. I was stronger than I thought, strong enough to forgive, strong enough to rebuild, strong enough to love even when it wasn't returned. The other day, I got a call from Sister Patricia at San Jose. Some of my old friends there had been asking about me, wondering if I was doing well. Doña Conceição, she said, would you consider coming back to visit? Not to stay, but to share your story with some of our residents who are struggling with family problems. So now, once a month, I go back to San Jose and spend an afternoon with people who are walking the same dark path I walked. I tell them about forgiveness, about patience, about waiting for God's timing instead of demanding immediate justice. Remember, I tell them, you are not a burden. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten by God, even when you feel forgotten by family. Your story isn't over yet, and there might be chapters of blessing you can't even imagine. Some of them cry when I share my story. Others look skeptical, like they can't believe such dramatic reversals are possible. But a few lean forward with hope in their eyes, and I know that my experience might help them find the strength to keep believing in second chances. As I finish telling you this story, dear friends, I want you to know that I'm not sharing it to brag about my vindication or to shame anyone who has treated their elders poorly. I'm sharing it because I know there are people listening who feel invisible, who feel like burdens, who feel forgotten and discarded by the families they raised and loved. To you, I say, you are not alone. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Your story is not over, and God sees every tear you've cried, every prayer you've whispered, every moment you've chosen love over bitterness. And to those of you who might be treating an older family member like an inconvenience, like a relic from the past, like someone whose time has passed, please, please reconsider. We are not burdens. We are libraries full of wisdom, hearts full of love, hands full of blessings we want to share. We are not your past. We are part of your future, part of your children's heritage, part of the foundation that makes your family strong. Love us while you have us, dear ones. Learn from us while we're here. Let us be grandparents and great-grandparents and storytellers and prayer warriors. Let us be family, because in the end, family isn't about who provides the most money or takes up the least space. Family is about love that survives betrayal, forgiveness that heals wounds, and second chances that make us all better than we were before. Thank you for listening to my story. May God bless you and your families, and may you never forget that with Him, all things are possible, even the healing of the most broken hearts.